Hello, I'm Dr. Julia Kleinschmidt. I'm with the Moran Eye Center at the University of Utah in Salt Lake City. In 2005 and then again in 2010, I had the lovely privilege of presenting to two BEBRF conferences that were held in Salt Lake City those years. Recently, Mary Lou asked if I would summarize those presentations and do it in a format that could be put on the BEBRF website. So I said yes, and here I am. So my topic for today is going to be resilience, living good life despite chronic conditions. Life is not a matter of holding good cards, but of playing a poor hand well. That's a quote from Robert Louis Stevenson, and was he ever right? Life has a habit of giving us lousy hands sometimes. And the key to good life becomes how we handle those situations as they arise. I like the whole concept of resilience because what it teaches is that we need to live life in such a way that we're ready. Whenever those times come up, we're ready. And it just makes sense to me. A definition from Random House Dictionary, and it describes resilience as recovering readily from illness or depression, or just, I inserted whatever life throws at you, including Blepharospasm, right? And I like this definition by Dr. Joanne Lemaistre, and she calls it a necessary feistiness. And I like that idea of resilience being feistiness. An interesting thing about Dr. Lemaistre is that she's a PhD psychologist, and within 2 months, earlier in her life, within 2 months, she earned her PhD in psychology. She gave birth to a baby daughter, and she was diagnosed with MS. So that event in her life encouraged her to change her practice focus to helping people deal with chronic illnesses. And that has been her practice, her clinical practice, all of her professional life. So when the going gets tough, the tough get going, right? We hear that all the time. I would like to insert there, when the going gets tough, the tough are ready. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. How do we need to set up our lives, line up our ducks, whatever, so that we're ready no matter what life throws at us? And so the question becomes, yes, okay, so that's great, but how do we do that? And I'd like to consider for a few minutes Dr. Viktor Frankl, and probably a lot of you have heard that name before. Dr. Frankl was an Austrian Jew when the Nazis overran Austria in World War II. And he and his entire family were put into concentration camps. At the end of the war, Dr. Frankl was the only survivor. His entire family had been wiped out. He went on to become an incredibly successful psychiatrist, an author, lecturer, just tremendously respected throughout the world. He wrote the book, it's just the classic book, Man's Search for Meaning. I recommend it. And by the way, I do have, associated with this talk on the BEBRF website, a short bibliography of the various books and resources that I'll refer to during this talk. Okay, so you can look that up. Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. So people would frequently, throughout Dr. Frankl's life, they'd say to him, well, this terrible thing happened to you, probably one of the worst things that could happen to any of us. And they would say to him, well, how did you do it? You know, how did you come back from this awful thing that happened to you and create such a good, full, rich, successful life? And Dr. Frankl's reply always, and this is from his book, he said, when we are faced with a situation we cannot change, our challenge is to change ourselves. And so the point is that we are not at the mercy of whatever happens to us in life. We can do a lot about how we respond to it, our attitudes and so on, and that's what I'd like to focus on today. So again, how are we going to do about this? What I did is a number of years ago, I became very interested in resilience and did a lot of search of the literature. There's a lot out there, a lot of writings, a lot of books, journal articles, and so on. What I did is I picked out 12 characteristics that I kept running into across journals, across books, and so on. Picked out 12 characteristics of people who have been found to be high in resilience. And those are what I'd like to share with you today. Those 12 characteristics, in other words, the 12 characteristics of people who play well the hand that is dealt. Okay, so first of all, number one, people high in resilience have learned how to let go of the myth that life is fair. Okay? Now, let me emphasize that it's pretty normal. It's okay. When something first happens, it's all right to indulge in a little bit of this, oh, woe is me, you know, how could this happen to me, why me, that sort of thinking. But if you're going to live life well with whatever has happened to you, you've got to get past that. Okay, you have to get past that. I was at a party once. It was a going away party for a friend of mine who was going on a trip around the world. And one of the other guests gave her a gift, and it was a little talisman. And it was a little something, a cord, and a little bag of something, I don't know what was in it, but something that he gave her. And so Kate, my friend, said, oh my gosh, it's beautiful. So will it bring me good luck? And this other friend said, no, not necessarily, but it will help you live in harmony with your destiny, okay? It will help you live in harmony with your destiny. And that sounds pretty good about what we can all be about, right? Living in harmony with whatever is going on in our lives. Do you all like Hagar the Horrible? I think he's wonderful. So this is a cartoon, and Hagar is saying, I work hard, but something always seems to defeat me. He says, life isn't fair. And there's this big cloud up above him, and this booming voice rolls out and says, you're just finding that out? Life is not fair. Things happen. Another characteristic of people high in resilience, they tend to plan ahead. They get their ducks lined up in advance as much as possible. They prepare plans, they're generating options, they're talking to people around them and trying to come up with some good ideas. They adopt a problem-solving mindset. Now, most of my clinical practice over the last 25 years has been with either people who are blind or who are going blind and with their families. So I've run into this sort of thing a lot, and it's always been so encouraging to me when my patients move from, oh, woe is me, this terrible thing has happened to me, to, okay, so what am I going to do about it? Okay, and at that point they're ready to start accessing resources and in their heads dealing with it so much better. Another characteristic of people high in resilience, they tend to be observers of other people around them, and they're watching for the traits and the tips and the ideas that they can use that will help them in getting along with whatever's happening. In other words, they look for good role models, and that's really wonderful. They've developed and they use their support system. And what better example do we have of this point than BEBRF? And all the wonderful support that it offers, the information, the research information. You feel like you're a part of things, you're a part of a group of people who are all walking the same road. And that's really, really important. Another characteristic, people who are high in resilience tend to work at not becoming habitual complainers. And this is my wording, I put in parentheses, it will drag you down and it annoys others. You know, I don't care how understanding family and friends are, if you go on too long, they tend to start getting kind of impatient, they've heard enough. It is normal to feel sorry for ourselves at times, you know, when we're having a rough day or whatever, but we do need to do whatever we can to avoid what I call the whiner rut. Okay. Maya Angelou, extraordinary woman, a poet, playwright, civil rights activist. And she once said, "I have learned that just because I have pain, I don't have to be one." When we start finding ourselves with a lot of negativity in our heads, a lot of negative cognitive thoughts, we need to think about one of the basic principles of cognitive psychology, and that is that it's not so much the events in our lives that mess us up, it's the way we choose to think about them. And you notice I say that we choose to think about them, okay? Someone said, tell me how you think, and I'll tell you how you feel. Okay? Hamlet, Shakespeare's Hamlet, said, "Things are neither right nor wrong, but thinking makes it so." It's how we perceive the events unfolding that impact us, and then how we choose to think about them. And let me give you a personal example, because I think it illustrates this principle well. Over my 25-year history in clinical practice here at the Moran, there was a lot of pressure. Now, I'm retired now, more or less, but at that time there was a lot of pressure. And I'd be going down the hallway, and in my head were thoughts like, this is absolutely ridiculous. How in the world am I expected to get all these things done? You know, I need at least 2 more Julias around here. And, you know, I'd be going along, and this is just not even right. This is unfair. You know, how am I going to do it? And just, you know, and then, you know, these thoughts were obviously not helpful to me. So I would think, stop. And in cognitive psychology, it's called thought stopping. You catch yourself with negative thoughts, stop. And I would say to myself, and please feel free to use this expression, just change the name, but I would say to myself, Kleinschmidt, get a grip. Stop. And then I start thinking, okay, come on. You know, you're doing work that you love. You're making a difference in people's lives. You're being helpful. You're surrounded by friends and colleagues here at the Moran Eye Center who are incredibly supportive, who are encouraging, and so on. I'm in a beautiful building in a beautiful city. Come on, Kleinschmidt, settle down. And I would. So just that thinking, we have power over our thoughts. We have power over how we think about things. And I would encourage you to use them. Keep this in mind, watch for those negative thoughts, and switch off. In cognitive psychology, it's called reframing. So reframe whenever you need to do it. And you'll be surprised, I think, how much that can help. People who are high in resilience are resourceful. They're pretty proactive themselves, but they ask for the help and support of others when it's needed. And they feel okay about it. And they say thank you afterwards. They express warmth and appreciation, and they're okay with it. They're okay with it. We'll go on to the 6th characteristic of people high in resilience. They tend to put effort into personal growth and enhancing of self. They're learning, they're learners. And I think that's important because when we're struggling with some issue in our life, we tend to turn inward so often. They look outward, and how can I improve myself? What do I need to do? These are the people who do a lot of reading, or they'll take classes or workshops. They'll learn to play the guitar, they'll learn to do this, they'll learn whatever. And they are aware that they need to develop and use good communication skills, good people skills. People with good people skills are the ones who are more likely to access resources. They're the ones more likely to pick up the phone, to check out things that are available and to talk to people. They're also more likely to have a good support system, just simply because they've got those skills, the people skills. They also put effort into their own physical health. And what do I mean by that? Well, what I mean is all that stuff we've been taught since 1st grade. Proper nutrition, enough rest, exercise, little or no use of alcohol, and so on and so forth. I don't need to go into all this because we know it, don't we? But so often we tend to forget these things. And when we're not healthy, we tend to think and to behave in unhealthy ways. So, you know, for example, proper nutrition. If a person skips breakfast, by 10 o'clock or so, that person is going to be hypoglycemic. That person is going to be snapping at people. They're going to feel shaky and nervous. And these are the people that so often will talk about, well, my job is stressing me out. Well, and it's not so much the job that's stressing them out, it's just that they're not taking care of themselves and they're not physically ready to handle whatever they need to handle. If somebody stays up until 2 in the morning watching their favorite movie, the next day they're not going to be functioning at peak. You know, with these people, a broken shoelace is the end of the world. They can't handle things well. So we need to keep these things in mind. They're critically important, even if it is just stuff we've learned since the first grade. People high in resilience tend to accept responsibility for making life livable and rewarding. They, blaming others or God or fate for one's misfortune is normal while mourning. So when it first happens, of course, life can just knock us to our knees sometimes. And it's okay then, but it should not become a way of life or an excuse for personal unhappiness. There's so many people who go through life saying, well, if only this would happen, then I would be happy. Or if this person would do this, then I would be happy. And whatever, hinging their happiness on something else or on someone else, that doesn't work very well. Okay, that doesn't work very well. Our lives, for the most part, are noisy, they're demanding, they can be difficult. One of my favorite expressions is peace is not the mere absence of noise. It's the finding yourself amidst the tumult, okay? So despite everything going around, no matter what's happening to us, we need to assume responsibility for claiming that happiness, okay? People high in resilience work at finding a balance in life. Now, this whole concept of a balance in life, for a number of years, I was a little bit uneasy with it because I couldn't figure out exactly what it meant, or how to figure that out. How do we know if we have a balance in life or not? So what I'd like to do is I'd like to share with you a little model that I've found very helpful. Now, I've used it a lot in my clinical practice and with myself. And this model is from transactional analysis. It's part of cognitive psychology. It's a very complex, people spend years studying transactional analysis and then using it to work with patients. And I'm going to really simplify. In fact, I'm going to oversimplify TA, but I think it'll work for us for this purpose. And with apologies to Dr. Eric Byrne, who is the one who created transactional analysis, I'd like to share with you my version, transactional analysis model of ego states. We are comprised of 3 ego states, Dr. Byrne says: parent, adult, and child. Now, TA has some fancy schmancy terms, although they frequently use parent, adult, and child, but we'll just stick with this. The parent in us is a part of us that is the judgmental. It's the shoulds and the shouldn'ts, that I really must. It's the part of us that is saying, I really should be fixing more nutritional meals for my family. I've been a little lax lately, way too much time at the fast food places. I really need to watch better what I'm eating, what my children are eating. I really need to be studying more. That's the parent in us. The adult in us is the part of us that gets things happening, that gets things done. So taking my examples for parent, the adult would be saying, okay, so let's see. When I do my grocery shopping on Saturday, so when I get home Friday night, I'm going to work up a menu for the coming week, check and make sure that I have the right ingredients and so on and so forth, and I'll shop on Saturday morning and get what I need for the week. So that would be the adult part of us, making things happen, making life work. The child in us is the playful, the carefree, okay? And what this model teaches is that the well-balanced person has these ego states nicely balanced. So let me give you a couple of examples. For a number of years, I worked around issues of divorce. I was doing counseling at one of our local colleges here, and a lot of the people that I worked with were women who were going through divorce or had been through divorce, had no educations, were going back to school because they were desperate to be able to provide for their families. They were single parenting, they were worried about finances, they were just heavily burdened. And as I worked with them, what I would find so often was that these women were all parent and all adult. Okay? They were just, focused on what they needed to do and how to get it done and all. No room for the child in them. Okay, no room for the child. As I worked with them, I would, frequently, I just use this model with them, and I'd say, you know, it sounds like you're just all parent and adult. Where's your child? And so often I got the response, you know, I haven't seen my child since my marriage started falling apart. Okay? So then part of my work with them was helping them find that child. You know, before all this happened, where did they find the joy and the fun in life? And we'd start working around issues like that. The flip side of this is when I was working on my PhD, I worked as a teaching assistant. So I was teaching a lot of the 101 classes here at the University of Utah. And because of that, I had a lot of freshmen in my classes. And it was a very interesting experience for me, because I found that there are a lot of freshmen out there who are in college because their parents want them to be. And their idea of university life is shutting down the tavern at 2 in the morning after a couple of pitchers of beer, and then of course they're going to go home and study, right? You know, so they don't get enough sleep, they're hungover, whatever, they miss their first class, they're late to the next one, their grades are, you know, the problem for them is that they're too much child. Maybe they're all child. Where's the parent and adult in them? Okay. So this is just a nice model to keep in mind, you know, the healthy balance of all three ego states, the three parts of us that we need to function in the world. People who are high in resilience tend to seek out enjoyment in life. Now here's the child again, right? Even when they're hurting, they find the humor in situations. They make themselves laugh. Life without humor is like a carriage without springs, jolted by every pebble in the road. Okay? And so true. Laughter can just lighten everything, including us. A wonderful book, also listed on the bib, The Healing Power of Humor by Alan Klein. It's a fun book to read. It's a delightful book to read and makes so much sense, and you laugh a lot when you're reading it. People who are high in resilience tend to be flexible. Okay, there's a country and western song, something about the tree in the backyard that bends with the wind, and it survives. Okay, and we need to be flexible if we're going to make it through this life. I think it's really healthy to learn within reason how to shrug and say, oh well, you know, or it is what it is, and just try to let it go. But flexibility counts for a lot. People who are high in resilience are ones who tend to nurture a belief in God or a belief system outside of oneself. A loyalty to country, a belief in the dignity and worth of human life, a respect for nature, the earth, its creatures, whatever. But the point is, they tend to not be egocentric. They tend not to be wrapped around themselves and looking inward. They tend to look outward at others, and they tend to care about others. They tend to volunteer, to be helpful to others. And think about it. You know, when we reach out, we help someone else, that lifts us up, right? So very important point. People who are resilient tend to find meaning in their misfortune or difficulties. And sometimes that's hard to find, but you can usually find it. It should be there. And for example, my patients struggling with blindness, and so often I'd have, particularly my older patients, would say macular degeneration and all, and they'd say something to me like, you know, this is really hard, this is hard, I don't like it, but you know what? I've decided that it's my opportunity to teach my children and grandchildren how to handle adversity with grace. And they saw that as their role, and somehow or other finding that meaning help them to live with this condition and to be okay with it, much more okay. There was a meaning for it. Another wonderful example, Tuesdays with Moran, just a wonderful book that I really do recommend, on the bestseller list for years, actually. I'm not sure if it still is on the bestseller list, but it's an incredible book. It's the story of Dr. Maury Schwartz. He was a professor at Brandeis for many years, and Dr. Schwartz was dying. And one of his former students found out about it, started traveling back to Brandeis to meet with Dr. Schwartz every Tuesday, because when he was an undergraduate, a student, he would meet with Dr. Schwartz every Tuesday during Dr. Schwartz's office hours. And they would meet every Tuesday to discuss life and goals and whatever. And so Mitch Albom started going back and meeting with Maury Schwartz again. And I'm just going to read just a little excerpt from the book. Maury's doctors guessed he had 2 years left. Maury knew it was less. But my old professor had made a profound decision, one he began to construct the day he came out of the doctor's office with a sword hanging over his head. Do I wither up and disappear, or do I make the best of my time left? He had asked himself. He would not wither. He would not be ashamed of dying. Instead, he would make death his final project, the center point of his days. Since everyone was going to die, he could be of great value, right? He could be research. I mean, all professors like research. He would be a human textbook. Study me in my slow and patient demise. Watch what happens to me. Learn with me. He had been a teacher all of his life. Learn with me. Maury would walk the final bridge between life and death and narrate the trip. He entertained growing streams of visitors. He had discussion groups about dying, what it really meant, how societies had always been afraid of it without necessarily understanding it. He told his friends that if they really wanted to help him, they would treat him not with sympathy, but with visits, phone calls, a sharing of their problems, the way they had always shared their problems, because Maury had always been a wonderful listener. Okay? Delightful book, wonderful book, a lot to be learned from it, and I do recommend it. So we need to find the meaning in our misfortunes. So there are the 12 characteristics. And I hope that they're helpful for you. Let me just leave you with another one of the quotes that I just love. This is from Helen Keller. The human being is born with an incurable capacity for making the best of things. That coming from a woman who was born blind and born without being able to hear, Helen Keller. Okay. I appreciate your time with me. I hope that what I've shared today is helpful to you. Just one last slide. This is another quote from Dr. Lamaestre. And she finished her book after the diagnosis with this. She says, I wish you a safe and thoughtful journey on what is truly a road of hope. Okay? And I wish you the same. I wish you the same. Thank you so much.